So I've always enjoyed solving puzzles and working out how things work. And as a genomic scientist, my job is to work out how it is that your genome, the genetic material that you've inherited from your parents, gives rise to health and disease. Now, one of my characteristics is that I don't like to take no for an answer. And when I'm faced with a challenge, I really do not like to give up. Now, as a scientist, this can be a great characteristic to have because many of the problems we try to deal with can take years to overcome. But it also can be a weakness. For example, this guy. So for those of you that don't know him, he's Captain Ahab. He was a captain of a whaling vessel that went in search of a whale called Moby Dick. And it became his obsession finding this whale. And it ended up losing his life and the life of all of his crew members. So it didn't end well for him. And I'm kind of embarrassed to admit this, but as I see a lot of friends in the audience, my lab sometimes calls me Captain Ahab. I hear the whispers, he's going Ahab. It hurts, but I hear them. So what I want to tell you about today, though, is my story of, not Ahab, but of my search for finding answers for kids with rare diseases, which in medicine are known as zebras. I wouldn't say I was monomaniacal, as I have many things I'm obsessed about, but I have been the principal investigator of the Rare Diseases Program that I started with Kim McBride and Gail Herman just over 5 years ago. And we've been, since then, a large group of us, the group has grown, and we've been on the search for answers for rare diseases. And that's about where this Mad Lib analogy ends, because I do not have a leg made of zebra bone. So these are the heroes of this story. These are kids with rare diseases. There's over 7,000 different types of rare disease that have been described to date, and many of them have their underlying cause in the genome. Now, to be a rare disease, you have to infect fewer than 1 in 2,000 kids, but many of these diseases actually affect fewer than that. But rare doesn't mean they're insignificant. Taken together, these rare diseases have impact approximately 1 in 10 Americans. That's more than cancer and AIDS combined. In my own family, I have 2 family members that have a rare disease, and I'm going to tell you about one of them. These are my youngest twins, Samantha and Charlotte. And Charlotte, despite liking to dress like Rainbow Cat for our entire European vacation, has a perfectly healthy heart. Her sister, however, was born with a congenital heart defect. And here you see her, Samantha, in the NICU when she was first born. And as parents, we had to go for a very anxious few days, as she was quite sick when she was born, wondering what was going on with her. But we were fortunate that we received a diagnosis very quickly. And she's actually a patient now in our heart clinic here at the hospital. And you can see her, she's actually doing very well. In that photo there, you see me beaming, because I'm thinking this is going to be a great opportunity to use in my presentations. So you can tell I was not that concerned about her. But the heart defect that she has affects about 1 in 10,000 kids. So how do these rare diseases get the name zebras? Well, it comes from a clinician called Dr. Woodward, who in the 1940s, when teaching medical interns the art of diagnosis, said, when you hear hoofbeats, think of horses, not zebras. And basically what he was trying to teach was diseases will be caused by the most obvious thing. Don't go off looking for unobvious things. But when it comes to rare diseases, they are often caused by something very difficult to diagnose. Their cause is in the underlying genome of that individual, and it can be very hard. The clinical features that the patients present can mask what is going on. With the advent of the Human Genome Project, this allowed us to change how we go about diagnosing these diseases. So this project started in 1990 and was about a 15-year effort to sequence just 1 human genome, and it cost $3 billion. Today in the Institute of Genomic Medicine, we can sequence 48 human genomes in just 2 days. And it's done on the surface of this glass slide using a technology called next-generation sequencing. And we can have 10 billion sequencing reactions occurring in parallel. Now, it would be great if these next-generation sequencing instruments actually put out a finished genome, but they don't. How they work is they have to chop the genome into very small pieces, about 300 of those characters at a time. So it's a bit like taking the entire contents of a library and running it through a shredder, because this is what the output looks like that we get from this machine. So what my team has to do as bioinformatics scientists, they have to take this output and reassemble it, work out what the genome actually looked like. But not only are they reassembling it, they have to reassemble it carefully enough that they can find a single typo on the page. In this case, in the middle here, a C has changed to a T, and that change is enough to cause a rare genetic disease. So we have an issue here in terms of the analysis. How do we do this? Well, we solved that problem with an algorithm that we called Churchill. I don't have a good reason why we called it Churchill. I just like Winston Churchill, and so that's why we went with it. But what Churchill does, it's an algorithm that very efficiently parallelizes that analysis process. It takes that shredded material and in parallel will assemble it. When we first tried to do this with a human genome, it took us 2 weeks to find the answer. Now with this algorithm, we're able to do it in under 2 hours. So we have the technology to sequence the genome really quickly. We have the technology to analyze it really quickly. How are we applying this? Well, as I said, we started a rare disease genomics program here at Children's, and this is our steering committee. It actually represents the tip of the iceberg of the people that are involved in this process. But this committee is made up of genetic counselors, clinicians, and scientists like myself. And what we've done is we've gone to the community here at Children's and we've said to the clinicians, if you have a family that's been undiagnosed for some time and you think would benefit from whole genome sequencing, we'd like to sequence them. And so we have clinicians nominate families and we take them through the process of genome sequencing. Our lab performs the sequencing, my group performs the analysis, and then the committee meets back together to discuss the results and see what we can find. And to date, we've done 100 patients, 100 different families have gone through this program, and we have about a 50% success rate in finding an answer. And I'm just going to tell you about two of those stories. For me, though, doing this has been probably one of the coolest things that I've been able to work on in my career. And as I told you at the beginning, I like solving puzzles, and the human genome being 3 billion pieces is a really big puzzle to work on. So doing this at times has felt much like a game, trying to work out what's going on, what are the clues, can we solve it? But that really changed for me when I met one of our patients. I'm going to call him Adam. Adam was one of the first patients to undergo human genome sequencing here at Children's. And I met him with Kim McBride. We went to consent the family in our neonatal intensive care unit. I'd never been inside a NICU before. When I met him, he was desperately sick. He'd been born missing a piece of his brain, and he had essentially no detectable skeletal muscle anywhere in his body. You can see an MRI image there of his legs, and where that white material is, that should be muscle, but it's actually just fatty material. His clinicians at the time said they'd never before seen a case like this where there was no detectable muscle. As I heard Kim talk to Adam's mum and enroll her into our study, I heard the mum describing how she was going to have to give up work to care for him, and she was already beginning to search for answers. So put yourself in her position. Why did this happen to us? Will it happen again? Was it something I did? By the time I got back to the elevator, I lost it. I began to cry, and by the time I got to the ground floor, I went Ahab. I was determined to find the answer for this family. It turned out to be much more difficult than I imagined it would be. We did not find the answer the first time we sequenced this child, and he went into our collection of what we call undiagnosed cases, where we couldn't find the answer. But that changed just last year when my colleague, Dan Cobalt, was at a human genetics conference. And he met a clinician there presenting a poster with a child with exactly the same clinical features as Adam. When we looked at their data, what we found was that both Adam and this other clinician's child had exactly the same genetic change in their genome. They both had the same typo. And this allowed us to diagnose this disease and then publish it so that if someone else has a similar condition, they'll be able to get to that diagnosis much quicker. The second case I want to tell you about is a case of a brother and a sister. And these children had low muscle tone. They suffered from seizures that couldn't be treated, severe developmental delays, and a host of other clinical features. This family had been on what we call the diagnostic odyssey. For 15 years, the parents of these children had been searching for an answer. They'd gone from different clinical division to different clinical division, having different tests done after different tests. but still no answer. We enrolled them into our study, and 5 days from starting that sequencer, 5 days later, we had the answer. We found that mum and dad were both carriers of extremely rare mutations in a gene, and that their children had inherited both bad copies of these genes, which gave rise to the disease. And this allowed us to solve this case. They had a diagnosis of pontocerebellar hyperplasia type 2D. Now, for us, that was great. We solved it. We had an answer. But for the family, it was huge. Our genetic counselors reached out to them and described the mother saying how she couldn't express how much it meant to her to finally have that answer, that her search could end. It also meant that they had community. Any of us that are suffering, knowing that we're suffering, and when you have a rare disease, you often feel like you're suffering alone. You have no one that you can connect to. For this family, I did a search and was able to find 2 blogs, very quickly find 2 blogs of children with exactly the same condition, and hear stories of a mother describing their children and their struggles, and their hopes of new treatments and ways to manage this disease. For this family, they no longer were alone. They had a community that they could be part of. So what do I see as the future with this technology? Well, in the Institute for Genomic Medicine, we're starting a new program that will focus on these really sick kids in our neonatal intensive care unit. What we hope to do, beginning in January next year, I'll say it so we're committed to doing this now, that we hope to be able to perform rapid genome sequencing and return results back to these families within 48 hours. It's critical if you have a rare disease to get that diagnosis early on, as it can often be those first few days of life that there's a window in which things can be changed. Now, of the diseases that I'm describing, 95% of them have no approved FDA treatment as of today, but that's changing. Work that's been pioneered here in our Institute for in our Center for Gene Therapy has been using novel technology to fix the typos, to go in and change that broken gene and correct the mistake. You've all heard, I'm sure, the story of like Jerry Mandel's work with spinal muscular atrophy. This is a condition that children with this disease are typically dead by the time they're 2. And here you see dancing in front of Jerry Evelyn, who was the first patient to receive this treatment. She's 5 and doing well with her disease. So my hope as I look to the future is for these guys that today don't have a treatment. But just because their disease is rare, I hope I've been able to show you that it doesn't mean that it's insignificant. All of these kids deserve an answer, and all of these kids one day deserve a treatment. Thank you.